Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our Pirkei Avos shiur, started by our beloved dad and continued by our brother Rabbi Dov. I'd like to call on Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein to kindly introduce the shiur tonight. We are truly honored to have him. Over to you, Rabbi Goldstein.
Very much. The honor is mine. Anything which is associated with the late Rabbi Tanzer, blessed memory, is an honor to participate in, and to pay tribute to him. And I think that it's so appropriate. And I want to commend Rabbi and Rebbetzin Masinta for firstly establishing the shiur for the late Rosh Yeshiva during lockdown, and he taught so many people, and so many people benefited from learning Pirkei Avos from him over, on this platform, and also now continuing it in his memory, because Pirkei Avos is something which was so special to him and so dear to his heart, which he loved so much, and also it is such a reflection of who he was. As we learn in the second Mishna, that the world stands on three things: Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, the learning of Torah, davening to Hashem, service of God through davening, and through acts of kindness, of chesed. And the Maral says that those represent three relationships. Davening represents our relationship with Hashem. Chesed represents our relationship with the people around us. And he says learning Torah represents our relationship with ourselves, because we also have a relationship with ourselves. We have three core relationships. And he explains that to be a good Jew, we need to holistically deal with each one of these relationships, our relationship with Hashem, our relationship with the people around us, and our relationship with ourselves. We have to relate to ourselves as well. And so what Pirkei Avos is about is holistic greatness. It's saying that in order to be a great Jew, we can't just be in one strong, just in our relationship with Hashem, or just in our relationship with people, or just in our relationship with ourselves. We need it in its totality, and it's the totality of the person that Pirkei Avos addresses and calls for total greatness all around. And late Rosh Yeshiva was a Rav and a leader and a Talmid Chacham, who encapsulated greatness in all of these areas. He was a master of chesed, of kindness and sensitivity to people. He was a devoted servant of Hashem, with deep and spiritual davening. He was a master of learning Torah. He represented all of these three pillars and all the three relationships, and served as a role model to all of us, to me personally as a mentor and an advisor, and a person and a Rav of such kindness, compassion, and wisdom that whom I miss all the time. There's so many times over the last number of weeks that I've thought there are things that I would just love his advice on. I would love to just pick up the phone and have asked him his advice, and realizing, as I'm sure everybody does, how much we miss him. But the way to continue the work of a Rav, of a Tzaddik, is to teach Torah in his name and to teach the Torah that he loved. And so it's such a special tribute, this Pirkei Avos, and I feel so honored to be invited to say a few words. And what could be more appropriate than the words of Torah being taught by his son Harav Dov Tanzer, who's such an awesome Talmid Chacham, recognized both here and all over the world, as a Talmid Chacham of incredible standing in all areas of Torah, and so that's an incredible nachas, that the shiur now can continue with Rav Dov Tanzer, as the Gemara says, that Bra Kara D'Avua, that a child is the extension of his father. And so what a tribute, what a schus, what a merit it is for the late Rosh Yeshiva, what a schus and a tribute it is for all of us. And once again, Yeshar Koach on to Rabbi and Rebbetzin Masinta for your vision and drive to make this happen. And please God, the series of shiurim should continue with incredible bracha and inspiration, and be an elevation for the soul of the of the late Rosh Yeshiva, whose Talmidim are all over, and the Torah continues to be increased in his name, and will for generations ahead in Yirtzeh Hashem. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm going to stay in here as much of the shiur that I can. There is an event which I'm speaking at just now, of a new rabbi and rebbitzin starting at Rosamerch in Santon, which we wish them great hatzlacha. So I'm going to say words of blessing there just now, but I'm going to stay to hear as much of the shiur as I can, and just want to wish everyone with great bracha and hatzlacha for this evening and for this series of shiurim.
Thank you very much. Evening. Thank you so much, Rabbi Goldstein. And thank you for the beautiful words, the divrei mili de hespeda. My dad really cherished his relationship with Rabbi Goldstein, and he really loved the fact that Shabbos spoke internationally with a Pretoria accent. It meant a lot to him. He really enjoyed that, and he loved davening with you in the shul. He loved the schmoozing that you had before and after the droshes, and thank you for your kind words, and thank you for honoring us. It's truly during the Yud Beis Chodesh, the entire year is a time for hespeda. The time at Chochem, we lost so much midas tovas, and welcome again to this Yeshiva al Kivroi. As Rabbi Goldstein said, it's a fitting memorial for a Talmid Chacham, is to continue to light his lamp, the lamp of Torah, to maintain the flame of Torah. Talmid Chacham, whose life was ultimately about Torah, was committed to Talmud Torah, and the greatest honor and merit that we can do is maintain that. As I said previously, it's almost certain that he gave the longest standing Gemara shiur in the country, more than 5 decades of a Gemara shiur, and that then morphed into the Pirkei Avos shiur in the lockdown, and now will continue B'ezrat Hashem as his Pirkei Avos shiur. And one thing we see when we study Midas is something to be learned. It's Torah. Pirkei Avos, you want to learn Midas, it's not just the way, act like a certain way. It's something to study. It's a dvar chokhmah. So much chokhmah. So we're on to the second Mishna now. Shimon Hazadik. It's such a short Mishna, but it's got so much in it. Shimon Hazadik. If it's shaykh to say it was one of my father's favorite Mishnayos, because he loved them all, and they're all equally beautiful, but this was truly one of his favorites. Shimon Hazadik was Haya Mishayare Knesses HaGadolah. He was one of the remnants of the men of the Great Assembly, Hu Haya Omer, and he used to say, and who doesn't know these words? Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Omer, the world stands on 3 pillars. Al HaTorah, the study of Torah, as Rabbi Goldstein said, Al HaAvodah, on divine service, and Al Gemilus Chasodim. That's what the world stands on. And Shimon Hazadik, as a personality, deserves studying. He was the Kohen Gadol for 40 years. Immediately after Ezra. He was called Hatzadik. Not so many people that are called Hatzadik. He was Hatzadik. There are great miracles that happened during his tenure. 40 years as the Kohen Gadol, the Ner Ma'aravi of the menorah, never extinguished even once. The fire on the Mizbeach, never extinguished, even though there was only wood for 12 hours, it always remained. The scarlet ribbon on the Sa'ir Azazel always turned immediately to white. The people relied on him. He was their tzaddik. Shimon tzaddik. You can rely on Reb Shimon. So he's called the tzaddik. And in his time, the Gemara says a fascinating ma'aseh. The Kusim, they convinced Alexander the Great, who was on his rampage throughout the world. He attained world domination like few had in history and even until now. The great general was on a march to take Israel. They had convinced him that the Jewish people were making an uprising, a revolt. And he amassed his massive armies and went marching to Israel. Shimon Hazadik, they didn't know what to do. It was almost like the 6-Day War, even worse, because this was the superpower, Alexander Mukdon. And Shimon Hazadik, with a few followers, he set out to meet Alexander the Great, and he donned his big day kahuna, and they traveled from Yerushalayim, and they traveled from Sparta in Greece. And when they met in the morning at sunrise, and Alexander the Great beheld the spectacle before him of Shimon Hazadik in his big day kahuna, and surrounded by his Chaim, what happened next caught everyone by surprise. Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world, he jumped off of his horse and he prostrated himself. He bowed before the Kohen Gadol. And his general said to him, how can it be? The great general himself bowing to this Jew. What's this about? And Alexander said, when I go to battle, the night before a victory, I see this image. This is the image that I see before me. We don't know, does he see Shimon Hazadik himself, or he saw some spiritual force? He was Zoiche. An angel was leading him. And the big day kahuna that Shimon Hazadik was wearing were intricately woven. And the Torah goes to great extent to tell us every stitch, every detail came out, because they're all meaningful. They are divine forces, spiritual forces that are represented in every part of the Kohen's clothes. And that angel that appeared to him somehow represented all this. So he says, this is what I see. This perfect image of human excellence, complete human excellence, that's what I see. And obviously he let the country go, and many children were named Alexander, many Jewish children following that encounter. Clearly, Shimon Hazadik himself represented excellence of humankind. He became the epitome of what a mensch can become. And now let's see what the Mishna tells us. The first thing it tells us is not his Torah. The first thing we thought is, Hayah Mishayare Knesset Hagedoyle. He was the remnant. What does it mean, the remnant of the Kohen Gadol? Of the Knesset Hagedoyle? The Mephoshim explained that the Anshe Knesset Hagedoyle was a body of 120 sages, but they were not self-replenishing. They embarked on a course of events at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. They set the structure of Torah, as we discussed previously, so that Torah can last without prophecy, go into Golus. They saw that Golus was going to be an inevitable where the Jews were going to go, and so they set up Torah, they structured out tefillahs, they set the canon of the Tanakh, and they saw Gadlus. They were the Knesset HaGedolah. But as a member passed away, they didn't replace him, because it was never meant to be a permanent body. It was always a temporary structure to set the Jewish people in a structured way that they could survive even Golus. And as the Rav says, La'achar shemesu kulon, they had all died. Nishtayra hakabola b'yodu. There was one man who became the Baal Masorah. He had the Masorah for the future. This was Shimon Hazadik. And so he crystallized all the Masorah from Moshe Rabbeinu through the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, and now we learn his Musar. And Hu Haya Omer, this is what he says. Some say that it says he was Mashiach Knesset HaGedolah because his message was not exactly the same as the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They said, as we spoke about previously, they said, it's all Torah. We're setting up Chochmah, the Jewish people, in the lack of prophecy. We're ushering in an era of Chochmah. And Shimon Hazadik had his own take on it. And let's hear what he said. He said there are shlosh dvarim, there are 3 pillars. But what does it mean, Hu Haya Omer? It's a phrase that we'll see often in Pirkei Avos. Hu Haya Omer. He often used to say, he was Ragil Tamid, he always said this. The Hasidic twist, Hu Haya, this is what he was, Hu Haya. And then Omer, it wasn't just an intellect of Midas, that he defined the Midas better than anybody else. Hu Haya, this is what he lived, this is what he breathed. And this is what he could tell us as the Shiur Knesset HaGedolah, And again, it's an appropriate Mishnah to learn in the memory Le'ilu Nishmas, a great father, because he was Meshiach Knesset HaGadolah. Zakana Rabbonim, 6 decades in the Rabbonos in South Africa. He was really a remnant of the old school. And Shimon Hazadik taught these 3 things. And I'd like to submit that actually they are in line with what the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah said. Anshe Knesset HaGadolah taught that in the demise of prophecy, the Jewish people will only survive intact if we create a culture of learning, a culture of Torah. Shimon Hazadik refined that and defined that. And he said that what does it mean? A culture of learning is not just Torah. A culture of learning means many things. And he said, Al-Shloisha Dvarim, actually a culture of Torah, of learning, of Chachma, needs 3 pillars. It's made up of a tripod. Ha'olam oimed, the world stands on these 3. That means, according to some, it's the reason for creation. Bereshis, Bishvil Torah, Bishvil Klal Yisrael. Hashem created the world for Torah and for Chesed, for Klal Yisrael. So that's Ha'olam oimed, the world was created for these. It's the tachlis, the purpose of the world. Some say it's the only way to maintain the integrity of the world. Because as Reb Chaim Volozhin explains over here in this Mishnah, the world looks material and physical. The truth is it's not. The neshama lasts forever, not the guf. It's a connection, a hybrid of the spiritual and the physical. And the physical world itself, the material world, can only survive through its spirituality. And therefore, ha'olam oimed, this olam can only oimed on the spiritual energy. And that's called ha'olam oimed. You need something, these 3, to hold them together. Chiefly it's Torah. He said ha'olam oimed, moral excellence is called oimed. It stands. Shleimus enough. And from now on, an individual will be held to this standard, these 3 criteria. You need to measure yourself up. We need to measure ourselves up. Torah, avodah, and chasadim. Society, Dad loved to say that chinuch was crystallized. The core mission of chinuch was here. Torah, avodah, gemilas chasadim. The Chafetz Chaim, the great Chafetz Chaim, used to say that every single night a person has to ask himself, did I learn some Torah today? And did I do some chesed today? So Shimon Hazadik told us 3 dimensions. Ha'olam oimed, if you're missing one of them, your Torah is missing. Something in your Torah isn't there. I would like to submit that what Shimon Hazadik, part of what he was saying is that where there's no more prophecy, the reason there was no more prophecy is because people had a limited capacity to submit totally, the ego totally before Hashem. And Memela there couldn't be prophecy. It wasn't from Hashem's side that prophecy stopped. It was from our side. And Shimon Hazadik taught that of course you have to learn Torah. Torah is what keeps the world going. But avodah and chesed are what addresses this committed life. To do avodah, chiefly the korbanos, is to surrender the self. In the mashal, a person is surrendering life. In the model, the metaphor of the animal, as the Ramban says, surrender the self and the ego to Hashem's greater vision. That's the avodah. And all the mitzvahs are meant to be that. It includes also all the mitzvahs. It's not just doing mitzvahs. It's surrendering the self to Hashem's avodah, to Hashem's service. Without this ability to surrender the ego to chesed, to helping people, to seeing someone else, to feeling, to empathizing, one's Torah isn't really Torah. That's what Shimon Hazadik was saying. The tripod of spiritual excellence is these 3 dimensions. As the Maharal said, life is about relationships. It's not about matter. It's about relationships. We relate to Hashem. That's the avodah. We relate to people. That's the Gemilas Chasodim. And we relate to ourselves because we're not actually one entity. We're not a unit, a solitary unit. We're actually a neshama and a guf, and they both have lots of koiches. And there's a relationship going on, and we have to know to develop that relationship. And our Torah is the way that we develop and maintain and regulate all these three relationships. So we start with Torah. I remember when I was in high school, my dad started a series of Friday fireside chats based on the American president who guided the Americans through the Second World War. On the radio, he gave these famous fireside chats where he set out his policy, he dispelled the rumors, he maintained a morale. And my dad used to call these the fireside chats where he gave Mussar. And he stressed these ideas in this Mishna week after week in a very friendly, informal way, as was his wont. He didn't want to call it Mussar, he called it fireside chats. And this is what he told us. The Torah is not just the best way, the cleverest way of navigating life. No, it's much more than that. The Torah is the blueprint, ala Torah. The Torah is the blueprint for life. It's not just that since we have parents, we must honor them. No, it's the opposite. Hashem wrote in his Torah, honor your parents, and therefore he created a world in which they are parents. Dad used to quote the Telzer of Yeshiva, who always said as follows, we know this Mishna, we say it every morning. Many great mitzvahs, there are great rewards in this world and the next world. And many great mitzvahs. And then it concludes, the Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Talmud Torah is against all of them. And he used to explain, not only it outweighs all of them, it's not only that, and it defines all of them. They all need to be defined by Torah. Because without Torah, as Rav Chaim Volozhin said, lending for interest should be a mitzvah. You're helping the person. He wants to pay the interest. It should be a Gemilas Chasodim. Oh, you need Talmud Torah for that. But it's not just to define and regulate. That all of them, your kindness and your avoided, all needs Torah. Without Torah, we can't define one good thing. We can't define midos. We can't be a mensch. Learning Torah. That's what we're doing here. And my father used to so often quote, and all of you will remember it, this the Ruach HaChaim, the Nefesh HaChaim, that he says on this Mishnah, he says as follows, the world stands on Torah as follows. From Torah emanates all existence, spiritual and physical. Im chas v'shalom haya ha'olam kuloi, mikatzehu v'ad katzehu b'telim in ha'Torah. If chas v'shalom, the entire world would stop learning for one moment, rega echad, even one moment, if the entire world, there would be no Torah learning, says Rav Chaim Volozhin, the prime Talmud, as you remember, of the Gaon Vilna, and the father of all the yeshivas as we know it to this day. He said as follows, Hayumamish kol ha'olam os betelim v'chozim l'soiv avoy. The entire exercise called planet Earth and the entire universes, physical and spiritual, they would cease to exist. Because the Torah is not just Hashem's information. It is the kli through which Hashem sustains the whole world. And he gave us this kli, this machinery to imbibe, to absorb, to paskin, to study, to say chidushim on. What a humbling gift. But that's what Torah is. Ala Torah, the olam oimed. And it all starts with Torah. The Mishna says it starts with Torah. And then comes avodah, means, as we said, submitting the self and all one's resources, including life, to Hashem. That at the end of life, one says, thank you, Ribono Shel Olam. As Rav Avigdor says, a person has to be able to say, thank you, Borei Olam. I like to think that that's what my father was thinking, because until his last days, he never complained. He had no complaints. Baruch Hashem. Avoided his tefillah. Anyone who was in his shul, daven in his shul throughout the years, to hear his shema, to hear his nishmas kol chai pierce the heavens. In his study at home, he would hum the words. He learned to daven as a child in the Polish shtibel, avarim lebedike tefillah. And that's the tefillah he sought to imbue his Talmidim with and his friends. He actually changed his nusach tefillah in order to be able to daven aloud with the kids and with the adults, so that they should be part of his tefillah. Chesed, the third pillar of the world, is gmilus chasodim, service to others. And it actually, if my father used to say this all the time, and you remember it, he said it's not just winning friends and influencing people. It's not that model of kindness. It's the different model. It's the kindness of gemilus chesed. You chayav to give chesed, because so much has been done for you. Hashem has given you so much. You have received so much. You are chayav to treat Hashem's people with kindness. And he taught that in every relationship, a person has to seek to be a giver and not a take. It means when you receive something, always try and give back something extra, something more. He loved the quotation of the Chazon Ish. They asked the Chazon Ish, what's the highest achievement that a person can achieve in 70 years on earth? And he said, not to hurt anyone. Don't hurt anyone. When we realize it's Hashem's people. Klal Yisrael are Hashem's people. And therefore, when we're kind to them, when we're patient with them, when we're giving to them, we're giving to Him. The Avos, the three Avos, the tripod of Klal Yisrael, the Gemara says, on which all Klal Yisrael stands as a historic mission, as an entity, as a tzibur. Avraham, as you know, my father spoke about this so much, was chesed, amud chesed. Yitzchak, who went on to the Akedah, was avodah. And Yaakov, he was the Yoshev Ohalim, Torah. The Shleimus of Klal Yisrael needed these three, and each of us individually need three. Each of us as a family, we need to define ourselves through these three, Torah, Avodah, and Gmilus Chasodim. We note, says Rav Chaim Voloshin, that when it came to the Avos, which was the inverse order, Yaakov was Torah, whereas our Mishna starts with Torah, but that's because he was closer to Klal Yisrael. That's why we needed it. It was part of Klal Yisrael. Let me conclude with the following. Avoid the sacrifices we would never have thought is one of the three fundamentals. We would have understood Torah. We would have understood even Gmilus Chasadim as a fundamental, but sacrifice is such an essential part of Judaism, but yet we see how much in the Torah it takes up. The answer is our Mishnah. It's essential to the Torah personality to be giving over the self and the ego for Hashem's vision. The essence of Torah, giving over one's mind to Hashem's Torah, to Hashem's law. Avodah, korbanos, and all mitzvahs is giving over the heart, the drives, the self. Give it over to Klal Yisrael, to Hashem. Chesed is giving over the koiches and practical resources to Hashem. And it's all, the Mishna is saying, what is this Torah personality that will survive even in Golus, even without Beis HaMikdash, without a land and without prophecy? You know what it is? It's this Torah personality. It's learning Hashem's Torah, but it's developing the personality of lezulosoi. It's to give to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dov. Thank you so much. It was outstanding. Dad truly epitomized the embodiment of this Mishnah. And it really was him totally. The more you spoke, the more I just saw him. Thank you, everyone else, for joining. And we hope to see you next week, same time. Thank you very much to the Chief for your beautiful words. Have a good night.